Good morning, party people, and welcome to office hours in beautiful Hawaii. I'm out in Hawaii at the Aulani Resort. It's a Disney resort out in Hawaii that really is less about Disney and it's more about Hawaii. For example, we went to a big luau last night, and Disney was only mentioned once when Mickey and Minnie came on stage to do a luau or do a dance at one point. But it's a really beautiful resort. Some friends of mine are here for their birthday, and so we flew out for that. And when they said that it was their favorite resort in the world, I was like, that's ridiculous. That seems kind of far-fetched. But I tell you what, after I've been here, I think this might be my favorite resort I've ever been to. The food is fantastic. The water park is great. They really did a good job of designing it so that it's a huge property, but you never really feels huge. You're always going between these little different areas. There's always places for everybody. It's really nice. Today we're going off on UTV rides through Jurassic Park. Not obviously there is no real Jurassic Park, but in the filming location for Jurassic Park, this beautiful valley, just absolutely gorgeous. So we did a helicopter tour through it a few days ago. So I'm really looking forward to being down on the ground and riding around through it. So let's take your top voted questions from PollGab. The top voted question comes from CuriousDBA, who says, do you still recommend formatting data log and TempDB drives with 64K allocation units, or have storage advancements made the differences not that big of a deal between, say, 64 and 4K? So these days, I don't see any big measurable difference as I jump from one allocation unit size to another. And the only testing that I've had time to do, because I only will do this level of testing if clients will pay me to do it, the only time I'll do this level of testing is just a quick test of restores and backups. And those aren't really great tests to tell the difference for OLTP activity anyway. I wish that someone would pay me the amount of money that it would require to test across different allocation unit sizes. But of course, since it's different for every kind of storage, like AWS, excuse me, all their different kinds of storage, Azure's, all their different kinds of storage is going to be different for every one of them. On premises, all the different storage brands, it just doesn't make sense for me to do that level of testing across all these when it would take me months in order to do it. So unfortunately, I don't have an easy answer for you there. Next up, MyTeaGotCold says, my developers are scared of seeing old data, so they never query my synchronous replicas. Since I can't guarantee 100% sync replication, how can I help them offload queries? You know, normally I tell you what's the problem that you're trying to solve. And when I say that, part of what I mean is look at what your top wait stat is on that production server. Let's say, just to say, that it's CPU. If your top wait stat is SOS scheduler yield, find the queries that are causing SOS scheduler yield and work your way down through those. For each of them, ask, does this data need to be absolutely real time? Now, if all the top queries, let's just say by CPU, absolutely do need to be real time, then it doesn't really make sense to hassle your developers to try to move those off to other replicas, because even with sync replicas, you can't guarantee that they're up to date. You might say, Brent, what do you mean by that? Well, sync replicas only mean they're getting to the log file, not that the changes are being made to the data pages in real time. There will be a redo queue that can pile up on your synchronous replica, and the data can get behind even when it's in synchronous mode. Now, on the other hand, if you go through those top CPU queries and you go through the top several, and they could be a few minutes old, maybe there are queries about yesterday's sales volumes, or there are queries about joining lots of stores together to find the closest store for a client, then it becomes a lot easier to say, hey, I need you to offload this one because it's number 2 in terms of CPU, and our CPU is our biggest bottleneck on the primary. Hopefully that helps. Next up, Ceiling DBA is Watching You Tabulate asks, what's the lowest RTO and RPO that you've ever seen for Whoops queries and how was it satisfied? Oh, that's a great question. So I was teaching a training class once in Las Vegas and was at an annual conference that would happen every year in Vegas. And we were talking about RPO and RTO, and I explained it to the audience. And a company that, or a group of folks that worked for a company that did financial trading came up to me afterwards, and they said, "We get it now. We get how 00 RPO and RTO is so hard, but we've been required by our company to build it. So what should we do?" And so they hired me, and we ended up doing a sketch out architecture. And then after that sketch out architecture, they went and built a system that every time that they were going to query the database, every time they were going to do an insert, update, or delete, they wrote that insert, update, or delete to another server first. It was a NoSQL server. They wrote the command they were going to run. Then they ran the command in SQL Server. Then they recorded the completion of it over in this NoSQL box so that they could basically go back and rewind and see every query that had been run so that they could effectively reverse it. If they were going to do an update, say they were going to change a customer's name from Alex to Bob, then they recorded the before and after values in their NoSQL system as well. It was a stratospheric amount of work. It was extremely expensive to execute. Fortunately, it didn't have too high of a write volume, but that's how they accomplished it. And now you start to see how hard that is. Next up, Tenga Dating Simulator. I see what you did there. Said, have you ever heard of Microsoft giving out for free Standard Edition to companies that buy massive amounts of Enterprise Edition? I think my DBA has been tricked. Yeah, totally, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I worked for a company once that we had an enterprise agreement, and at one point we needed to make a huge investment in, or we were talking to Microsoft about, hey, we want to make a huge investment in Enterprise Edition, but the numbers don't make sense here. It's going to be so expensive for us to do all of our licensing. And so they cut us a deal, and they said, all right, if you buy this many cores worth of Enterprise, we'll throw in this many cores worth of Standard Edition for free. So it's a licensing negotiation, it's a pricing negotiation. The better you are at negotiating, the more discounts and deals you can get. Now, I will say, I was not involved with doing that negotiation. I'm a tech person. I don't do very well at that kind of negotiation. So I just said to my superiors, my managers, I suppose is a more politically correct term, I said, here's how many cores we need. I'll let you figure out with Microsoft how to make that financially happen. And they did. Chandwich asks, I've been vocal about my desire to become a DBA at my company. I've developed scripts to do automation, I've taken all your classes, I've changed roles to work with MVPs, but I just can't wedge my way in. What am I doing wrong? Ask your manager. Just go to your manager and say, hey, you know what, I'd really like to become a database administrator here, and this is the company where I want to do it because I love this company. What's stopping the company from letting me become a full-time database administrator? And then you're going to find out. Maybe the answer is that they don't have any openings for it. Maybe they can't justify someone being in a full-time DBA position. Maybe there are political reasons where they're not allowed to hire in anyone called DBA. I've seen that happen where they had to be called a data engineer, a sysadmin, or even a developer instead. Maybe your manager just doesn't know. I know it sounds crazy, but you know, when you lay it out like that, hey, I'm coming to you because I really want to do this, then that helps open that door. Otherwise, no one else can possibly tell you what it is. Maybe, I'm going to say, I know this isn't true because I recognize your name from like questions in classes and stuff, but for other people in the audience, I should just say, maybe you're not good at that job. Another example I've seen of it was when the manager saw their job as irreplaceable. The manager said, I would love to move you to another spot that you want, but you're so good at this task you're already doing, I can't afford to let you leave it until we get someone trained. And then all of a sudden that opened up the door where the person went, oh, I have to find someone inside the company who can do my job and I have to train them how to do it. And then that takes care of that for you. It takes time, but it does it. RoJo asks, I inherited a table that has 20 indexes. What's the solution? Should I segment it into tables with their own indexes? Should I split it? The indexes are on a person table. So this one's really hard for me to answer just without seeing things like the schema and seeing what the problem is, because 20 indexes isn't necessarily a problem. Let's say that you don't have a lot of blocking in your workload right now. Well, 20 indexes might be just fine. On the way up, as StackOverflow.com was growing, Stack Overflow had 40, 50 indexes on some of their biggest tables, and it was fine. We didn't have blocking issues. We needed those indexes in order to make read queries perform better, and then like 99% of the queries were reads. So it comes down to what's the problem that you're trying to solve. We cover some of that in my Mastering Index Tuning class. But even in the Mastering Index Tuning class, I teach you like how do you get down to a lower number? How do you find the right mix of indexes? How do you know when you have too many indexes versus when you're fine to add more indexes? That's my Mastering Index Tuning class. Dan the DB man says, I noticed that SQL Server gives you the ability to register a DLL as assembly and then use it in a stored procedure or function. Do you recommend taking advantage of this feature, or do you avoid it? If you have C# code, C# app code generally belongs on an application server. Application servers are free as opposed to database servers. Microsoft database servers are very expensive in terms of licensing. Generally, I wouldn't run anything CPU intensive on the database server itself. If you have application code, leave it running on app servers as long as you possibly can. Only go into using DLLs on the SQL Server when you have an extraordinarily hard problem to solve that you can't just solve with a free application server. And then finally, one more. Dopinder asks, what's your opinion of optional parameter plan optimization in SQL Server 2025 for addressing parameter sniffing? Well, the reality is that there are no public builds of that yet. There's no public documentation on how the feature works yet. And even if there was public documentation on exactly how the feature works, you can't trust that it's going to be the same way at the time that the product actually ships. Microsoft in the last few versions has had a terrible reputation for touting things during the marketing period and then walking them back at the time of release. So until they actually bring it out, I don't really bother having an opinion on it at this point. All right, so there's a good round of questions. I am off to go running ATVs or UTVs through the jungle here in Hawaii. Hope y'all had fun and learned something, and I will see y'all on the next office hours. Adios.